What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to another edition of Touchline Talk right here on 110 Sports. Really excited to get into all of this today. So much to get to just because a lot of things started this weekend, a lot of things happened this weekend. You've got some of the bigger teams making their Premier League debuts. Serie A is starting, Bundesliga is starting. So we're going to try and cover as much as we can. One of the best ways to do that is always start with our first five. Game of the weekend, in terms of profile, matchup, significance, Liverpool-Chelsea. Chelsea still doesn't have their entire team there. This is not Frank Lampard's preferred 11. It's not that close. You still got Marcos Alonso playing left back. You still haven't brought Pulisic and Ziyech into this thing. But Timo Werner is giving this team something different. He is a legitimate threat on the counter, which is not exactly surprising given what he did at Leipzig. This isn't new information. He's got incredible pace. But it's one thing to play on the counter against Brighton when you're Chelsea. It's another to find a way to do it against Liverpool. And for the most part, until the game completely changed at the end of the first half, Chelsea looked decent. Liverpool looked really good. They came out completely differently than they did against Leeds. They looked like the defending champions. There was purpose. There was intensity. They were creating chances. But Chelsea had their fair share of chances too. They were hanging in there. And when you're playing at Anfield these days, that's all you can really ask for. 40 minutes in, Frank Lampard had to be pretty happy with what he had seen. And then you get Andreas Christensen football tackling Mane to stop that break and getting the deserved red card. And that's where it all went downhill for Chelsea. You're going to give up goals to Liverpool. You just can't put yourself in that position to go down a man. You gotta just do what you can to bother Mane and hope that your keeper can come up with a save. And if they score a goal, they score a goal. It's not the end of the world. And in this kind of game, when you're in that position, even if you go down a goal, all that's going to do is incentivize Liverpool to hold on to the ball more and give you more chances on the counter. Down 1-0, you still don't even have to press and start forcing things if you're Chelsea. They might have gotten a goal from the natural rhythm of this game. It really felt like Werner was going to get one at some point. He was close a couple times. He had some offsides in there. Havertz didn't look spectacular, but he's still just trying to figure it out. It's too early to make any assumptions or conclusions on him and what he's going to be at Chelsea moving forward. But you make that mistake in your Christensen. You compound it by not letting the play finish and taking it into your own hands. You get sent off. So then Liverpool goes into the locker room knowing they've got 45 minutes playing 11v10. A really nice passage of play for the first goal. Kepa makes a terrible mistake on the second one. All of a sudden it's 2-0. Game's done and dusted at that point. But even in that situation, Werner makes a nice little run across the edge of the 18 and draws a penalty. Jorginho then misses his first penalty as a Chelsea player in the Premier League. But there are still positives to take away if you're Chelsea. This is not the end of the world by any means. Again, they don't have their full team out there yet. But the problem, as I've said before, is now that you're down these points, and these are points you're not supposed to get, so it's not a huge issue. But if you drop any more points before this thing gets rolling, you're putting yourself in a bad position and expecting, maybe not expecting, but needing all of these guys to gel right away. This is not a season, at least in my opinion, where you can catch up and go chase down the leaders. You've got to be in striking distance from start to finish if you have a chance at winning this league. So it's not an atrocious end result for Chelsea. The biggest concern here is, again, the defense and specifically Kepa, you just can't find it. You just can't have those kind of mistakes. It's the same situation you've got with David De Gea at Manchester United. I keep harping on this. When you're trying to chase down Liverpool and Manchester City, your margin of error is already slim. You can't compound that by having your goalie do stuff like that. And it's also concerning because most of Kepa's issues have been shot stopping and his inability to make big saves and make saves that he should be making. This was a distribution mistake where he just didn't take care of the ball in possession. There's a reason that Edouard Mendy of Rennes is probably going to be announced in the next week as Chelsea's next signing to go play goalie. Kepa's just lost his confidence. I don't necessarily think this is the end for him at Chelsea or the end of him potentially getting back to being a member of the Spanish national team where people were calling for him to play over De Gea. He might just need a change of scenery and not have the pressure of being Chelsea's number one keeper. Who knows what Mendy looks like when he does get in if they get this deal over the line. But this is what you expect from Liverpool. It was really nice to see them look like themselves again. And the attack was in full swing against Leeds as well. They were much, much better defensively. This is what Liverpool does. There's not too much to say on that other than they're going to be right there in the title race again. To me, this was an important performance because I was a little concerned after that Leeds game. Just because of what you saw at the end of last season, what you saw in the Community Shield. That's really all we had to go on, and it hasn't been good. This was far and away the best performance we've seen in a while. It was comprehensive. They keep just doing their thing. They're going to be there until the end. It doesn't change my outlook on much other than just confirming that I believe Liverpool is going to be really good again this season, which is not a bold statement by any means. It's also been a big week for Liverpool in the transfer market and adding some reinforcements to this team. They get the Thiago deal done from Bayern Munich. He comes on and makes his debut. Wasn't the most inspiring debut in the world, but I'm not concerned about it. This is a very interesting deal because it gives Liverpool the one thing they haven't really had, which is a world-class midfielder who can control a game and pick apart a defense. You know, at the beginning of this run, I was guilty of looking at midfield and saying, I'm just not sure that can be a Champions League winning quality midfield with James Milner and Jordan Henderson. And I've been a Wijnaldum fan, but him by himself didn't give me that much confidence. And Henderson's been phenomenal, and Milner's been really good. You got to give him credit. I was wrong on them. But they don't have the ability to sort of control a game and dictate the terms of what's happening on the field the way Thiago does. You even saw it in this game. Henderson can pick a pass and rip apart a defense. Milner's done the same thing in the past. Obviously, Thiago can also do that, but he just gives them a presence in midfield they haven't had. Because you've got a world-class goalie, arguably the best defense in the world, a top 3 attack in the world, and now you add this kind of midfielder. There are very few spots Liverpool can improve, but theoretically that's one of them. They got him cheap. It was a terrific deal because he wanted to be here. Klopp wanted him. It seemed like this was just a matter of time before it happened. Bayern had kind of accepted that. So they got what they could for him before he just left for free. But this is the next step for Liverpool, is not only continuing to perform at the level they have been these past couple seasons, but finding ways to continue to reinforce and give yourself something a little bit different. He has a level of gravitas that none of these other midfielders do. And so now you're looking at this thing. You've got Henderson, Milner, Wijnaldum, Keita, Thiago, and Fabinho. That's a midfield combination. However Klopp wants to distribute those minutes, I can get behind. So that was just a really good deal, really smart piece of business. And the Diogo Jota signing is also interesting because, again, if you're looking at the spots that they can improve, world-class midfielder and a legitimate threat to support that front three and give them some cover. When you're looking at that bench, in terms of who would get substituted for Salah, Mane, and Firmino, it's Divock Origi, it's Minamino, Shaqiri, and Origi scored some crucial goals for this team. He's been good. I think you're fine with him as a backup striker to take the place of Firmino if Firmino needs to come off. But you could really use another difference maker out wide. And as these three get into their 30, 31, sort of the twilight years of their prime, maybe you can't afford to keep all of them. Maybe something happens. The idea of having a young rising player like Diogo Jota makes all the sense in the world, and he can come on and he can be the difference in a game, which is something that they haven't really had outside of that front three in terms of what they can bring in their substitutes. Origi scored some big goals, but he's not a guy that's going to take a game over. Jota can have that moment of brilliance that you see so often from Mane and Salah that make the difference at the end of the day. So Liverpool basically went and found the only two spots they could really improve, and they got some nice pieces. I really like both of these signings, and it just makes them even deeper. If there's one thing you could poke at heading into last season specifically, it was the lack of depth. And now this is a much deeper, even more talented team, which is hard to believe, but that's the world we're living in. They did enough. Klopp's gotten enough out of these guys that were there already that they didn't have to spend massively to upgrade the talent level. So now they can throw a little bit of money in there and build an absolutely loaded squad. Also want to talk about the history that was made by Spurs, and specifically Heung-min Son and Harry Kane. They go down early to Southampton, and then Son scores, and then Son scores again, and then Son scores again, and then Son scores again. 28th player to score 4 goals in a Premier League game. He's the second in the last 3 months. Don't forget that Mikel Antonio did this for West Ham back in July, which is just a very strange thing to think this has happened twice in such a short time span. But the more interesting part of this is that Harry Kane assisted on all 4 of those goals and then added one of his own at the end. Unsurprisingly, this is the first time in Premier League history one player has set up 4 goals for another player. It was remarkable to watch. But really, I want to take this opportunity to talk about Son. Because if you're looking at tiers in terms of the best players in the world, so tier 1, Ronaldo, Messi, Lewandowski, De Bruyne, if you want to throw Mbappe and Neymar in there maybe, and then you're looking at tier 2, your Raheem Sterling's, Harry Kane's. You can go back and forth on whether Mbappe and Neymar deserve to be in tier 1, tier 2. Eden Hazard at his best is tier 2. Those kind of players. Van Dijk is either tier 1 or tier 2. You can go back and forth depending on how strict your criteria is. But the bigger point is once you get out of tier 2, I absolutely believe Son is in tier 3. 100%. To me, he is a half step behind Harry Kane. Yes, Harry Kane is the most important, best player for Spurs. I can't dispute that. Especially with what he's been able to do since coming back from that injury in terms of creating goals as well as scoring them. He ripped apart Leicester at the end of last season on the counter. He's creating 4 goals for his teammate this game. He's been sensational in the time he's had when he's been healthy with Jose Mourinho as his manager. I can't dispute any of that. But don't forget that when Tottenham fell apart last season, it was not when Harry Kane went down with the injury. It was when Son got hurt after him, because Son was carrying this team and keeping them afloat, keeping them in a top 4 conversation. Then he got hurt, and that's when they ended up finishing in a Europa League spot and nowhere. They were somewhat close to the top 4 because of the craziness that happened at the end, but they weren't really in the top 4 conversation by the end of the year. That was because Son got hurt, not because Kane got hurt. I don't think Son gets anywhere near the credit he deserves. He's more than just a great player. To me, he is capable of being the best player on a top 6 Premier League team. You can't win a Champions League with him as your best player. He would be 2, 3, 4 at Manchester City. He's certainly not De Bruyne. You could argue I think he's kind of on the same level as Raheem Sterling. Again, maybe he's a half step behind if you want to put Sterling in there with Kane. But Son is sensational and a huge part of why Tottenham has continued to be pretty good and continued to be dangerous when Harry Kane has been in and out these past couple of years. His injury was what made the difference at the end of that season. That they were absolutely depleted anyway, but they were hanging in there with him and Lucas Moura up top. It was when Son went down that things fell apart. I think that's really telling, and to me that's not an accident. So I wanted to give him his props. It was an incredible performance. He's spectacular and right up there in terms of the best players in the world for me. Yeah, he's not that top tier, I get that, and he's not Harry Kane, but he's pretty darn close. I also mentioned at the top we had some season debuts for some high-profile teams across the major leagues in Europe. Specifically, we're going to talk about Juventus and Bayern here. They both get comfortable wins. There's not too much to say. There's no cause for concern by any means. Juventus get a 3-0 win over Sampdoria. Dejan Kulusevski scores in his debut. Weston McKennie looked good in the midfield. Ronaldo gets a goal and an assist. They don't have Dybala or Federico Bernardeschi due to injuries right now, so they got some players who may not be regular starters when everybody's healthy in there. But so far, so good for Pirlo. I mean, I'm not going to change my belief that Inter's going to win this league because Juventus beat Sampdoria. It was good to see Kulusevski get off the mark in his debut. He's going to be one of the more interesting players to follow on this team for me, to see just how much of an impact he can make with this step up to Juventus. They looked good. You can't really ask for anything more if you're Pirlo. It was comfortable. They just did what you expect Juventus to do. I want to see him play stiffer competition before I make any real assessments about where they're at. But good for them. Congrats to Pirlo on his first win. Then we got Bayern Schalke. Bayern, apparently, unsurprisingly, is in the same form they were at the end of last season. It's an 8-0 thumping. Serge Gnabry scores a hat-trick. They get goals left and right. They're just making this boring. They're so much better than everybody else right now. At least Liverpool has entertaining league games. Bayern is just destroying people. And, I mean, if they can do it to Barcelona, they can do it to Schalke. It wasn't shocking, but I talked about when we were previewing this game and what's next. Can Schalke get some momentum going at the beginning of the season and some confidence after a very poor campaign last time around? This is not what you want if you're David Wagner. I'm beginning to wonder how much of a leash he has, because this club should be better than that. And it's one game, it's Bayern, I get it, but that's just not the way you want to start. Bayern's going to win the goal differential battle, which is also one of the sort of underappreciated aspects of these Bundesliga title races, I think. You know, Juventus was not the best team in terms of goal differential in Serie A last year. They don't destroy people like this. So what that means is if you can score enough goals, if you're, say, Atalanta, and keep pace with points, you can hold the tiebreaker on goal difference. Borussia Dortmund has absolutely no chance of winning the goal difference battle in this league, which means they have to actually finish the season with more points than Bayern, which makes life even more difficult than it is just keeping pace with them already. It's just part of what makes them great. They continue to score goals. There's not too much to say here. They're spectacular. That's not new. It's a great start. We'll see if somebody can make it competitive in these next couple weeks with them, or whether they're going to just run through people for a while before they cool off even a little bit. Our fifth thing here, we're going to go to MLS for a second, because I want to talk about the best three teams in this league, because we're at a point where we can definitively say these are the three best teams in the league. Doesn't mean much in terms of what happens come MLS Cup time in the playoffs, because who knows what happens. It's chaos every single year. But there are three teams that are standing above everybody else right now. One is the Columbus Crew. They've been the most consistent team in this league. I've been harping on them since before the MLS's back tournament started, and specifically when they performed so well in it. I will continue to say they're for real. It's the best roster top to bottom in the league. Darlington Nagbe is making a real case for league MVP. He's not going to get it because the numbers don't stand out, but he's been spectacular for him. Giassi Zardes is scoring goals. They're getting contributions from other players. You've got a difference maker now at the 10 position in Lucas Salarian. The defense has been solid. Eloy Room is a good goalkeeper. They've got every single piece. Caleb Porter's been there before. He understands how to do this. I'm surprised they're this good, because nobody in the league really has been this good except for them. But they're absolutely legit. You've got to look at them as MLS Cup favorites right now. I fully expect they're going to end up winning the Supporters' Shield and have home field advantage. How much that matters in this COVID world, I don't know. But teams are still playing better at home than they are on the road, even without fans. So I don't see the Crew slowing down or falling apart. This is exactly who they are. They're the best team in this league right now. 2, Seattle Sounders. They jump back atop the Western Conference, and here's really all you need to know about what the Sounders have done. They were up 2-0 at halftime against LAFC after running rampant against LAFC's defense, drawing 2 penalties, which Nico Lodero converted. And Brian Schmetzer came into his halftime interview and was happy that they were up 2-0, but frustrated with what his team was doing. It didn't feel like they were good enough. He didn't feel like they were dictating the game the way they should, up 2-0. That tells you all you need to know about what Seattle's doing right now. They added a third, comfortably won the game. They are really good. That's not surprising. But we haven't seen a Seattle team do this in a long time. They usually stumble out of the gates, pick things up in the middle of the summer, finish as your 3 seed, your 2 seed, your 4 seed in the West, and then they just get rolling in the playoffs and enters one of the hottest teams in the league and then find a way to win. That's kind of what they do. This is different. This is just them being really consistent. They're getting the better of LAFC on a regular basis, which means something, considering nobody else has really been able to do that in this league other than maybe the Galaxy. But that was all I could think about when I was watching Spencer in that halftime interview. They're beating Rob Bradley's LAFC. Yeah, there was no Carlos Vela, no Edward Atwest. I get it, but that's still a really good team, and he wanted more from his guys up 2-0. That tells you all you need to know about where Seattle's at. Third team is the Philadelphia Union. They've won 5 of their 6 games since MLS resumed play in home stadiums. That loss came to the Columbus Crew in a game they very easily could have won. They made it to the semis of MLS's back, lost to Portland, who went on to win the tournament, nearly came back and sent that game to penalties. they've been consistent all season. They had a rough first couple games. Well, rough first game. Then they put 3 goals on LAFC at Bank of California Stadium. Got a draw out there, and then everything shut down. But the point I want to make here, we talked, and of course, their youth movement and their academy is one of the stories of MLS this season because everybody is realizing how good these guys are. Brendan Aronson is a star. I was too slow to buy into what he was doing. He's great. And now you've got Anthony Fontana, who's scoring goals left and right coming off the bench, who theoretically would be a replacement, at least an option for Jim Curtin if Aronson does get sold to somebody in the Bundesliga this transfer window. But the other thing I want to talk about here is, well, 2 things. So we'll stick with the depth for a minute in these homegrowns. Yeah, it's not just Aronson, it's not just Fontana. Mark McKenzie's going to go to Europe soon too. But you also have your backup left back in Matt Riel playing in a phenomenal cross in their destruction of Montreal over the weekend. It's not just they're producing really good players, it's that all of these homegrowns are showing up and contributing. It's not 1 or 2, it's 4, 5, 6. It's incredible to watch. So you've got your Aronsons, your Stars, your McKenzies, these guys are going to Europe, but then you've got these other guys who are right there ready to contribute in Rial and Fontana, etc. And there's another set of them coming, including Aronson's brother Paxton. This is a phenomenal academy. They are turning out ridiculous talent left and right. The other thing that needs to be appreciated about this team is how good their center backs are with the ball at their feet. This was not a thing that really you saw in MLS, and specifically with this team 4 or 5 years ago. But Mackenzie Glesnes and Jack Elliott, to a certain extent, can all ping the ball. It's remarkable to watch. And that's part of what's going to make Mackenzie so good in Europe, is he can rip you to shreds and pass right through lines. It's remarkable to watch. These guys are that good. The names aren't going to stand out to you, but they've got enough goal scoring. Aronson's been sensational in terms of his creativity. Montero just runs all over the place. Martinez destroys people. He's Diego Chara 2.0. And these center backs are phenomenal. Ray Gaddis has improved his ability to join the attack on the right. They've got depth and difference makers across the board. They are the real deal. We'll see how far it takes them, but these 3 teams are a step above everybody else right now. Columbus, Seattle, Philly, they're just doing it week in, week out. You can't argue with what they're doing. So that's our little MLS update. We're going to take our first break. When we come back, my 3 conclusions from the weekend. 1 in Germany, 1 in Spain, 1 in England. Going to try and get a little bit of everything in here. But I've got 3 big takeaways that I want to talk about from what we saw this weekend. So that's coming up next. You're watching Touchline Talk on 110 Sports. And welcome back to Touchline Talk. As I promised before, my three conclusions or takeaways from this weekend. Sort of what I did last week with the Premier League, but I want to focus on three things in particular, just because we've seen some of these teams for the first time in the higher profile teams. One of those being Real Madrid. And my takeaway is fairly simple. It's one game, but it's already pretty clear they're not going to be among the Champions League favorites. I don't see Zidane turning this thing around to the point where you're looking at them as on the same level as City, Liverpool, Bayern, PSG, whoever else may end up in that category. To me, they're going to look very similar to last year. They're the best team in Spain, but you saw a disappointing, unconvincing defeat in the round of 16 to Manchester City. To me, that's what you're going to see again this season. Maybe they make the quarterfinals, you catch a break in a draw, but when there's a clear gap between the best teams in the world of where Real Madrid's at right now. Part of that is because they haven't brought anybody in, so you've got this lineup of young, promising talent, but it's just there's something about your relying on Vinicius and Rodrigo and Karim Benzema when you're playing against Sterling, Aguero, or Liverpool's front three, or Lewandowski, Gnabry, Coman, Sané, Mueller at Bayern, PSG's front three, what even an Inter Milan can give you an attack. This is a really young group, and this is clearly a transitional year. It's not a criticism. Real Madrid is headed in the right direction. Zidane is getting what he wants out of this team and getting the guys he doesn't want out of there. See Tottenham's new additions. And James Rodriguez at Everton. But they're just not there yet. The offense was not clicking in all cylinders. They had a bunch of shots and a bunch of possession against Sociedad, but they just don't really have a way to put the ball in the back of the net consistently yet. And yeah, they didn't have Marco Asensio or didn't have Eden Hazard. And that's going to make a difference. And what I talked about when we sort of previewed this league is Hazard going to be the player he's capable of? Because then it's a little bit different conversation. I still don't think they have enough. But Barcelona is such a mess. I still think they're going to win La Liga. I'm not concerned because they didn't look great in their first performance of the first game of the season. But that really good run they had to end last year was more about the competition they were playing than what they were doing. That's basically my takeaway from what we saw. Is it's never out of the question for Zidane to win a Champions League. I'm not going to write them off entirely. He deserves too much respect to do that. But it would absolutely be a surprise and an upset if they found their way to a final or even to a semifinal. They're just a step behind some other teams right now. There aren't that many teams because it tails off really quickly after the four I mentioned. Then you're looking at teams in Italy and Dortmund and maybe another team from the Premier League in there. But to me, there's a clear gap between the favorites and the teams that you're really looking at to compete for the Champions League and where Real Madrid's at right now. Conclusion number 2, speaking of Dortmund. Jude Bellingham and Gio Reyna are absolutely legit and ready to contribute to the second best team in Germany right now. I don't want to say I was not convinced of Reyna. He was clearly very talented. But it took Christian Pulisic so long to get to a point, and he never really did, where he was the guy, one of the creative forces of that team, doing what he did at Chelsea. You never really saw him be looked at as one of the key pieces for Dortmund. He got a lot of starts. He did some really good things. You saw the potential. But he was never sort of solidified as a absolute no-brainer starter when healthy. because he's in such good form, you just can't keep him on the bench. That's what he's doing at Chelsea at the moment. So Reyna's still not even at, age 18, 19, 20. And he didn't play all that much last season. But all of a sudden, he gets a start here. He scores his first Bundesliga goal. He was the best player on the field in the first half. He draws the penalty. They win comfortably. And, of course, it's Bellingham who sets Reyna's goal up. I was also curious about Bellingham. Again, the potential is obvious. There's a reason the biggest teams in the world, and the biggest teams in the Premier League specifically, were going after him. He wasn't going to just make a step up to a random Premier League team. He was going to a powerhouse club. But it's one thing to have that potential and sort of work your way into things and make some appearances, look good in training, score a goal here or there, come off the bench. It's another thing to play yourself into a starting lineup for a Dortmund team that is absolutely a top 10 team in the world and is getting to the point where they might be top 5 based on what we saw in the Premier League this week. This is a team that can win a Champions League. Again, not likely. But they could absolutely catch a break, pull an upset, and win. It wouldn't stun me. It's more likely that happens than they keep pace with Bayern over 38 games, in my opinion. But these two guys are going to play themselves into the lineup for the foreseeable future. You can't take them out after what they did. And that was a good Mönchengladbach team. As we talked about in the preview, that was your first real test. They look spectacular. And then you get Sancho and Haaland doing their thing at the end of the game. But I was really, really impressed with what I saw from both of them. Enough for me. And it's not going to be perfect. They're not going to start every week probably. But this was the moment in that game for me. Convinced me that these two guys are ready to be starters on this team now. I was just hesitant that they were ready to take that step. That's really all it was. It wasn't that I didn't think they had the potential. It wasn't that I didn't think they had the talent. It's just you're asking a lot from 17-year-olds to do this right now. It's very different if these guys are coming at 20 and have been on the cusp of the first team for a little while and Reyna's scoring goals in cup matches against lower league opponents and things like that. But they did it against one of the best teams in Germany. It was remarkable. This is why U.S. fans are so excited about Gio Reyna. He's going to get to a similar place where Pulisic was at. I think that he is contributing consistently, getting starting minutes at a team you absolutely feel great about him playing, whether it's Dortmund or somewhere else. But that he's not just going to be a guy who's at a big club and it's nice. He is going to be proving week in, week out that he belongs in that starting 11, that he is absolutely that talented. Maybe it takes him a year or two, so it's 18 or 19, 20. But it's not like we have to wait until this guy's going to be 25 for him to be a really, really good player and an impactful player in one of the best leagues in the world. To me, Bellingham and Reyna have both arrived. They announced their arrival with what they did on Saturday. It was really, really impressive to watch. And Dortmund overall looked really good. Couple shaky moments at the beginning, but they were clearly the better team on the field. It was also great to see fans in the stands again with real authentic crowd noise. It's not the same because Signal Iduna Park is so special and you've got the yellow wall and it's one of the most unique, difficult places to play in Europe. Of course, it's not the same at only 20% capacity or whatever, but it impacted me more than I thought just to see. And yeah, you've had fans at MLS games, but it's different when it's Europe. It just is. That's no disrespect to MLS. I love MLS. But it's different when you get Dortmund fans in there than it is FC Dallas or Orlando or somebody. And if we haven't seen it in the Premier League yet. So it was really cool to see in the one of the biggest games on the soccer calendar this weekend. Fans back to at least give some energy into the stadium. It was just, we're so used to not having fans now and not feeling like they're part of the game. Those Dortmund fans were part of the game as much as they could be with their limited numbers. So that was just really cool to see. It gives you some hope that sometime in the near future we can get back to full stadiums and all of that good stuff because, man, we miss it. But that was cool to see. My other takeaway, going to the Premier League, I've been talking about this since before the season. My answer is now that yes, the Premier League really is 9 teams deep. Everton has been phenomenal so far. They're the winners through 2 weeks. You saw what Spurs were able to do against Southampton once they got going. They got the better of them and deserved to win that game in week 1. Then they take care of business against West Brom, who's already in trouble. Dominic Calvert-Lewin is scoring goals left and right. James Rodriguez gets on the score sheet in the Premier League. Richarlison's doing good things. I talked about that midfield after the Spurs game and how much I love the balance and all of the little things that Doucouré and Allen are going to do behind James. It's two games. I'm not going to overreact and say they're going to finish in a top 4 spot or anything. I don't think it's out of the question by any means. But I got to see more before I'm convinced that they're that good. But they're absolutely going to be in the Europe conversation. There's only 38 games. They've already played 2 of them. And they've got an edge on some of these other teams already because teams are already dropping points. Now, yeah, they got to play West Brom, which always helps. But they also beat a top 6 opponent, a big 6 opponent in Spurs. So, I'm curious to see just how good they can be, but they are absolutely in the conversation for those Europa League spots, and I would not be surprised if they are within striking distance of a top 4 spot. Leicester looked really good again. A little bit of a slow start against Burnley, but they come back and score 4 goals. James Maddison is not ready to start yet, but he's back on the field, which has got to be really good for them. They're getting closer to being fully healthy. They've still got their makeshift back line with the Johnny Evans suspension, but Ndidi's doing fine. They've got the depth to make this work short term. Castagno is really good again. Justin is fine on the other end. He got his first Premier League goal. This team in and of itself is not, in this specific group of guys that they're starting right now, I don't think it's getting anywhere close to top 4. But they're doing enough, and they haven't exactly faced the stiffest competition yet. But if they can just keep pace, and we're going to get a good test this weekend. But if they just keep picking up these points and hold on until you get Ricardo back, until you get Maddison back in the starting lineup fully fit, I've said this before, I'm going to say it again. They're going to be closer to the team that was second for most of the season than the one that fell apart at the end. How much closer? To be determined. Again, I'm not saying they're going to finish in the top 4 spot, but they are absolutely going to be in the Europa League top 4, top 6 conversation. Spurs rebounded nicely. It's just too early to make any long-term conclusions or bold statements based on one loss to Everton, who's looked really good. Gareth Bale is coming. Reguilon is coming. It's going to take Bale a little while to get up to speed and get healthy, but I continue to love what this team is doing, and you look at the depth that they have, and it's similar to Manchester City. Somebody made this point in the comments on Thursday. Absolutely correct. They've got too many spots, so we're going to talk about this again in what's next, with specifically about one player that's got the raw end of that this weekend. But they have all kinds of difference makers, and Mourinho can just put these pieces together. They're going to be there. They're going to be in the top 4 conversation. Again, I'm not reevaluating my picks for the top 4 yet. But these other teams look really good. I'm confident that they're going to be there. The team that didn't look so good was United. they were just rather lifeless against Crystal Palace. Congratulations to Crystal Palace. I'm ready to admit I was wrong on them. Picking them to get relegated, yeah, that's not going to happen. I'm ready to say that after 2 weeks. Central defense is still a problem for this team. Maguire has not been what they paid for. And Lindelof had a rough go of it. Zaha puts his chances away. It's not the end of the world. But that's the kind of game you can't afford to drop these points. Because now you don't have 3 guaranteed points against Everton. This is 9 deep. So you've got to find a way to take advantage of playing those teams where you feel like you've got a better chance of getting points, because you just can't guarantee that you're going to beat Leicester, you're going to beat Wolves, you're going to beat, of course, Liverpool, City, Chelsea, and Everton is in that conversation now as well too. I'm curious to see how they rebound, but it was extremely disappointing, and another one of those performances where you go, that's the reason why people can't take them seriously as title contenders. I think I was higher on them than most. Still had them only finishing 4th, but I thought that they could get into the title conversation. I'm not going to back off of that after one game, but it was certainly not a good start at all. And then the other team to round out these 9 is Wolves. They got 2 really quick goals in week 1, looked good against Sheffield United. Then you get your stiff test against Manchester City at home. So they got it in Molineux. They've had such a good track record against City. But Wolves were absolutely terrible in the first half. Could not string passes together to save their lives. And then the second half happened. Adama Traore got on the ball. They nearly scored a couple goals. Then they did score one. Jimenez got one back to make it 2-1. They had every opportunity to get this thing to 2-2. They didn't take their chances. Jesus puts the game away late in a goal that I just don't think happens if they get an equalizer. And so City get the win, which, again, is not a big deal for Wolves. You saw what they could do in the second half. They've had 3 good halves out of 4. It was just a really poor first half against City. I'm not concerned about that. I continue to believe that when you put this team, especially with a little bit of their depleted depth, without Johnny selling Doherty, when you just give them an opportunity to compete in the Premier League, you don't have to worry about Europe. They already lost in the League Cup. They got 2 things now, Premier League, FA Cup. That's exactly where they're going to be at their best. That's where you want them in terms of finishing as high as they can in the Premier League table, causing as many problems as they can. I'm still really high on what they can do. So I'm looking at this as 9 teams. I really am. The other interesting thing from a tactical perspective here, Pep decided to go with both Fernandinho and Rodrigo in the midfield, which is something we haven't really seen before. Who knows if it's a long-term thing, whether he does it again moving forward, or whether that was specifically to counter the fact that Wolves have had their number, so he's trying something different. But it looked pretty good. And we're going to rip Pep for overthinking things in the Champions League and going 3 at the back and all of that. You got to give him credit when his adjustments work as well. And this worked pretty well. Again, it's one thing to do it in the Premier League. It's another thing to do it in the Champions League against a team that you should be much better than in Lyon, again, versus a Wolves team that's had your number. That's the difference to me. That's what we need to keep in mind. But they don't need another attacking option in there. You had Jesus, De Bruyne, who was phenomenal again. I will continue to say I believe he needs to be in the conversation for best player in the world. Sterling, whoever else you want to throw on the wing, whether it's Bernardo Silva or in this game Phil Foden who scores, they got enough going forward. But what having 2 midfielders as opposed to 3 center backs does is it gives you another late runner in the box. Fernandinho nearly scored and had a beautiful run that he made a little slalom dribble and just held on to the ball, fought for it, got it back. Completely messed the finish up. But that's the kind of things he and Rodrigo can give you. They can join the attack, support, provide that extra number, that extra guy at the edge of the box, whatever it might be. Give you a goal on a set piece. That's what City need, is the ability to have those other numbers. They don't need them to actually create anything. De Bruyne takes care of that by himself. But that was what was so head scratching to me against the three in the back, is that it takes that extra runner away. But what having two guys sitting there does is it protects those center backs. And specifically when you don't have Laporte because of his positive test. So you bring in Nathan Ake, but you're still pairing him with John Stones. And they've just had so many issues at center back. Whatever combination of guys Pep has put out there. That just giving an extra body out there to cover, and a very good holding midfielder. Because they have two really good ones. So you put them both out there, and all of a sudden you've got that nice box to protect Ederson, to protect the middle of the field. It makes a lot of sense. And it works pretty well. Wolves are good enough to still cause issues. You saw that in the second half. But I liked the idea from Pep. I'm curious to see if it's a thing moving forward that he considers in these bigger games or against teams that are dangerous on the counter, or teams that are dangerous over the top with pace, to try and not let them get stretched and let runners in behind like you saw so much last season. But at the end of the day, the bigger point I want to make here is that Wolves looked pretty good. They looked phenomenal second half, very poor in the first half, but they're the real deal. That's not a surprise. They're going to be the same team, if not better, than we've seen since they came up. And that's 9 teams we just talked about there. Of course, Liverpool's already in this conversation and Chelsea's already in this conversation. Any of those 9 teams, to me, could end up in a European spot, which is just incredible to think about. But that was my big takeaway. We saw it again from Everton. We saw it again from Leicester. Spurs got their first win of the season. Wolves showed up against Manchester City, at least for 45 minutes. And United looked shaky. There's been enough points dropped already that there's some openings there. And the other thing to think about is, like I said, if Wolves find a way to put away their second, whether it's Podence, who also terrific nutbag of De Bruyne, that's going to go on his highlight reel forever, whether it's him putting away his chance, Jimenez putting away the chance that he should have scored on, I think if they make it 2-2, it stays 2-2. So you're talking about the Wolves taking a chance, and if Liverpool don't get the penalty at the end of the Leeds game, United, City, Chelsea, and Liverpool all would have dropped points in the first 2 weeks. Think about that for a second. Again, it's 2 weeks. We don't need to overreact to anything. But you could very easily be sitting here with Everton and Leicester at the top of the table, looking pretty good. And it wouldn't stay that way. But building that cushion is so important because teams are going to keep dropping points. It's going to be really difficult this year, I think, for a team to sort of do what Manchester United did at the end of last season and just pick up points after points after points and win all these games and go 10, 15 games unbeaten. Now, City and Liverpool will probably do it because they're just that talented. But if you're fighting for these other top 4 spots, these other European spots, part of this is going to be, can you get off to a good start and then just do enough to hold on to those spots? You don't want to be in a position where you're having to chase this. I really think it's going to be difficult. And so, some of these, Wolves are in a decent spot. Everton, Leicester set themselves up nicely. City and Liverpool survived, which is important for the title race and them going against each other up at the top. But it's remarkable depth. I'm absolutely loving it. So that was my takeaway from the Premier League. When we come back, a rather quick what's next, looking at some EFL League Cup action today and some MLS action tomorrow. You're watching Touchline Talk on 110 Sports. Welcome back to Touchline Talk once again. We're going to go pretty quickly here with our what's next to wrap things up today. Tuesday, this afternoon, some League Cup action. Manchester United gets an opportunity to rectify the loss to Crystal Palace against Luton Town. Luton Town's off to a terrific start in all competitions. They're an incredible story with what they've been able to do going through and climbing the English soccer pyramid to the point where they're right up there at the top of league championship right now. Who knows if they stay there, but they're in terrific form, feeling really confident. So that's going to be tricky for United. West Brom against Brentford. We talked about how much firepower Brentford still has. They already beat a Premier League team in Southampton in this cup. They're always going to be dangerous. That's going to be tricky for West Brom. West Ham against Hull City. Hull City is in absolute chaos. West Ham isn't in a much better spot with their transfer movement and letting Diangana go and all of the chaos there. But Hull City is even worse with their financial situation and everything going on there right now. So that one should be West Ham. That's going to be a tough one to swallow if Hull somehow pull off that upset. The other game that was supposed to happen here that I wanted to talk about, we were supposed to have a Leyton Orient Tottenham game. Tottenham paid for Leyton Orient to get tested because it's not required in the lower leagues. Sure enough, Leyton Orient came back with positive tests, so that game is postponed. They're still trying to figure out if they can play it, but the fact that Spurs have Europa League qualifying really makes this complicated in terms of finding a time to play. So we'll see, but this is another example of the risk that you take when you don't require testing across the board. And I understand it's a financial strain and really causes problems at the lower levels. But when you pair that with then playing these teams against each other in a cup where you don't have much margin of error and much maneuverability in terms of scheduling, you're going to come up with a situation like this. And this might not be the only time it happens. So Spurs were looking out for their own interest, but it was also good of them to provide these tests so that everybody is safer and Leyton Orient can realize what's happening and take the proper precautions and act accordingly. But this puts Premier League players in danger. And of course, it's not just about protecting the Premier League players. We want to keep everybody safe. But this is an example of the difficulties you're finding at the lower leagues right now because of the financial price they're paying of not being able to have fans in the stands, because that's where they get their money from. So you can't just expect them to spend thousands of dollars on tests because they don't have the money. So they're trying to do the best they can, but it causes situations like this. And the other part of this game that I alluded to is Spurs' depth. Dele Alli was supposed to play in this game after getting left out of the squad entirely over the weekend. And it sounds like Mourinho wants to sell him. PSG may or may not be interested. But this is the flip side to building an absolutely loaded squad like Spurs now have, like Manchester City has. You got to keep everybody happy. You got to find a way to get all these guys minutes. And Dele has enough gravitas and enough pedigree that he's not going to be happy just playing in Europa League qualifiers in the EFL Cup. It's a difficult road to navigate if you're Mourinho. Definitely newsworthy. When's the last time Dele got completely left out of a squad when he was healthy, ready to go? Mourinho just said we got too many players, and that's the problem when you're bringing in really good players like Gareth Bale and Lo Celso and all of these guys, and they're healthy finally. Everybody got minutes last year because everybody was hurt. So if you were healthy, you were playing. And that's just not the case at Spurs right now. Then we go on to Wednesday real quick. Highlight some of the MLS games going on here. Biggest game of the day in terms of where teams are in the standings and best matchup. Columbus, Minnesota. Talked about how much I like Columbus. Minnesota is currently 4th in the West. Their new DP Emmanuel Reynoso is getting into the full swing of things. They're dangerous. They're good. Well coached by Adrian Heath. NYCFC Toronto. NYCFC is right behind Toronto. Toronto's 4th. NYCFC's 5th. Toronto's got to try and keep pace with these teams ahead of them. Keep pace with Orlando. keep pace with Philly and Columbus up there at the top. So this is the game you got to try and keep pace with them. If City can get all 3 points, then they're back into this conversation for third, fourth place, trying to move up the standings. It's a good matchup between two really good teams that have a history. Wouldn't call them rivals, but these games are usually fun, and they go a decent way in sort of determining what the stage is going to look like as we get near the end of the regular season in the East. Portland and Seattle. Don't have too much to say here. Portland's been good. Obviously, Seattle's been great. This is just more about the prominence of this game in this rivalry because it's always fun. It's unfortunate, again, you don't get fans for this one. But Portland's trying to move up the West. Seattle's trying to hold on to first place and make sure that the Western Conference is going through CenturyLink Field and they're going to control everything. They've been great, but you never know what happens in this game just because of the rivalry and the unpredictability of it. Finally, we got Inter Miami, New York Red Bulls. Finally, Miami has come to life and is now back in the jumbled mess that is the mid to lower half of the Eastern Conference. The Red Bulls are reeling. They fired Chris Armas. It hasn't gotten any better since. This is an absolute opportunity for Miami to pick up 3 points, and all of a sudden you're talking about, can they get to 8th? Can they get to 6th? Because all of these teams are just so close to each other. They've been playing much better. I wouldn't even say they've been playing much better. They've been getting the results. They've had some good performances and just haven't been able to pick up the points. Now they're getting some points. They got to feel as confident as they have since the beginning. It means so much when you can string results together, actually get consistent points on the board. So they've got to be feeling good. Another really good opportunity for them there. Coming up on 110 Sports Live, we got Chris Brown with all things Major League Baseball as that season gets ready to come to a close. Looking at the playoff picture, all that good stuff at 1 Eastern. Josh Molnix will be back, like always, tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern. Check out everything we're doing at 110sportsmedia.com. All kinds of good stuff over there. And then I will be back with Touchline Talk on Thursday, as always, sort of getting ready for another massive weekend. We'll probably do the top 25 again. I'm kind of thinking that's where we're going to go. Could change. Never know. Keep you on your toes and make it a little suspenseful until we get the show rolling. But that's all we have for you today. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you Thursday.